And you're live?
Good afternoon. It's 12:37. This is the City of Annapolis Civil Service Board. We're going to go ahead and reconvene our meeting, which we started this morning, and we will resume the hearing of Mr. Howard Johnson's appeal. And this afternoon, Mr. Johnson's attorney concluded his case, so we're going to go ahead and start with the city's case, the respondent. Ms. Berger, if you're ready, we can go ahead and call your first witness, which I believe it's Mr. Kuchnar. Is that correct?
Phonically, letter N, letter R, Kokenar.
Okay. Okay. Demetra, could you swear Bob in real quick? Can you?
Got him.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm sorry, here I am. Do you solemnly swear or affirm under the penalties of perjury that the responses given and statements made will be the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Go ahead, Ms. Berger.
All right, good afternoon, Mr. Kokenauer. Can you spell your name for the record just so the court reporter?
Sure, just the last name or?
Yeah, you can do the whole name if you want.
Okay. Robert, R-O-B-E-R-T, middle name Dale, D-A-L-E, last name Kokenar, C-O-U-C-H-E-N-O-U-R, and I'm a senior.
Okay. How long have you been employed by the city of Annapolis?
In about 3 weeks, it'll be 20 years.
Okay.
Next January.
What's your current job title?
Superintendent of Public Works Services.
And how long have you had that title?
Essentially the 20 years I've been here, or almost 20 years.
Can you describe for the Civil Service Board sort of the principal duties that you have as a superintendent?
It's changed over the years, but the present job responsibilities, I have a section under me, facilities, which responsible for the care and maintenance of all the city-owned and city-leased buildings. I have a section that does asphalt repair works in the street. I have a mason crew that does sidewalk and curb and gutter repairs and some other things. I have a grass cutting or landscaping crew that does like lawn mowing, weed whacking, debris removal. That's typically a spring, summer, and fall job, and then they shift over to some other responsibilities in the winter months. I have hand cleaning crews, people that are physically out with brooms sweeping the streets. I have operators that use mechanical sweepers. And then the big thing is during hurricanes and snow events, we're the first responders to the scene, snow removal and debris removal. So,
okay. So getting right into everything, are you familiar with Howard Johnson?
Sure. Yeah, I've known him for quite a few years, I would say.
And what's sort of the basis of that familiarity?
Through work.
Okay.
I think.
I apologize. Continue.
No, I was going to say, I think originally he was in our yard waste crew years ago. I think he maybe started in Parks and Rec and then he came over to us. I can't remember if he was a temp for a while, then became a full-time employee. I know for a period of time he was with utilities. And I think when the city outsourced refuse and yard waste, I think he was in transportation for a while, but I couldn't swear to that part.
Okay. So he spent some time working in services.
Correct.
Do you recall when that time period was?
Well, I mean, most recently he was transferred over on September 1st of 2019. He had requested a transfer from utilities to services. I know he worked for about 3 weeks in a full-time capacity, and then he was on like modified duty after that. Prior to that, I don't recall the years, if it was 2010, 2011, 2012, but I'm pretty sure he was with our yard waste crew for a period of time, but the exact years, I'm not sure.
Okay, and you said most recently September 1st. Did you give a year? I mean, you may have an
I may have said it's September 1st of 2019. I have his transfer request, which he'd put in July 15th of 19 through utilities, which came through Public Works Administration and advised that he would be transferred. We come back to full duty on September 1st and be transferred to us on September 1st.
Okay, so beginning September 1st, 2019, he was assigned to Public Works Services.
Correct.
And what division, I guess is the best way to ask it, that was he assigned to within services?
If I remember correctly, he was put into the asphalt crew. I'd have to look it up.
Did you ever have any conversation with him about being assigned to the asphalt crew?
Not that I recall.
Okay. Did he ever make any requests of being assigned to the asphalt crew?
Not that I recall.
Did he ever make any requests of being assigned to a different crew or elsewhere?
He did. I think it was probably within the first week he had requested to be transferred over to what we call the landscaping crew. They're not sectioned in different payroll sections, but we have a group of people that essentially do weed whacking, grass mowing, debris removal, special kind of assignments, that kind of stuff.
Okay. Do you have some, well, actually, I'm going to show you what has been offered into evidence as respondent 24, if Hillary could pull that up. And that's the job description for the equipment operator 1.
Okay.
So if you just wait one moment, it'll come up on your screen.
Sorry, hold on one moment.
I have it on my screen at the top part of it.
Okay. So yes, if you can keep scrolling, Hillary, it's like you read my mind. Drawing your attention to the Americans with Disabilities Act portion, and in particular, the physical ability one. There's a section that says strength and agility sufficient to lift and maneuver heavy objects, such as heavy tools and equipment up to 100 pounds. As the superintendent of services, what does that sentence mean to you?
That is essentially an employee has to be able, in that job description, be able to lift up to tools and equipment up to 100 pounds and be able to climb in and out of trucks, equipment. And that would be in hot weather, cold weather, rainy weather, snow weather, heavy winds, that kind of stuff.
Okay. What sort of materials are equipment operator 1s expected to handle?
It can be a variety of things. I had some weights done for, like for example, a bag of cement that someone might be asked to move. That weighs 94 pounds by itself. A bag of coal patch, which a lot of our personnel use during the winter months to do the potholes. The bags themselves are 60 pounds. The jackhammers are 90 pounds. Plate tampers, which are the larger ones, they weigh 213 pounds. Jackhammers are about 128. And then one of the things looked into too was the heights of vehicles, because you have to be able to pull yourself up into a vehicle and then kind of lower yourself when you get out of it. Some of the heights go from 2 foot to about 4 foot pulling yourself up. There are some steps and things, but you have to pull your body weight up and then pull your body, watch yourself as you pull your body weight down. But there's other things that come up.
So in light of sort
I was going to mention sometimes like hurricanes, heavy winds, trees come down. We have to move tree branches, tree limbs. On occasion, flooding situations, sometimes we have to move the aggregate or the metal cans that are down, the street cans that are downtown around the dock area, the water areas. Those are just some examples.
Okay, so sort of kind of, I guess, in line with our impending weather predictions, does Department of Public Works deal with salt or distributing salt or handling prepared roads?
Like today, the crews were pulled in, essentially taken off most of their tasks, and they put their snowplow blades as well as their salt spreaders on the vehicles. And then they would load themselves with a large bucket loader truck, load their salt. We do distribute bags of salt. I don't know the weight off the top of my head. To our downtown crews, that's something an equipment operator may do, or we deliver some to the firehouses. Eastport in particular stores the calcium chloride we provide to them. So they would be doing a variety of things, preparing the vehicles and then operating the vehicles once it starts to snow.
Okay. And so some of the materials that you listed and the equipment that you listed, would any of, I think you started out with the cement bag. So would the lifting of a cement bag, would that require 2 employees to lift it?
Sometimes it's just one person. Could someone assist? Sure.
Okay. So there are times when one person may have to lift a cement bag
Sure.
by themselves?
Mhm.
Okay. What about with the use of some of the equipment? I think you mentioned a jackhammer and a plate tamper. Is that something that requires lifting?
Definitely the jackhammer. The operator of the jackhammer has to lift the jackhammer up and then operate it, and then they'll lower it when they're finished. So that's basically a one-person job. Some of the heavy equipment we have lifted up on a lift gate, called Tommy gates, lifted up and put into vehicles and then put back down. Some of the real heavy stuff is dragged across the ground versus, they're not going to have one or two people like lift the 213-pound plate tamper. That's typically pulled. A lot of times they'll actually get it started to run where it vibrates and it's easier to move that way.
So does the use of any of the equipment like the jackhammer, or I guess the maneuvering of it, does that require, what's the sort of maneuvering that's associated with it, with its use?
The jackhammer, you're basically holding on to two arms that are extended and operating a lever to a pneumatic. It's a pneumatic tool, so air is being forced into it and it vibrates up and down. And you're trying to guide it in a line that's been marked off for you to try to chip away or cut up.
Okay, so it requires some like pulling or pushing or somehow maneuvering. I am clearly not. This is not my forte.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely say pulling and then holding the weight up in an upright position and it vibrates you as it's going into the asphalt or concrete. Sometimes depending on what you're digging out. And there's the lifting up, especially if it was on the ground, you lift it straight up from its handles into the upright position that you're going to use.
So what about the hand tamper?
Hand tampers are kind of in the same situation. They're turned on, they vibrate. It's easier to move around that way. You're not going to necessarily lift them up shoulder height or above your head. A lot of times it's one person, could it be two? Sure. But majority of time, the tool is one person. So.
Okay. Now, going back to the job description, are there certain situations where someone who is an equipment operator one doesn't have to do tasks that require the heavy lifting?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, the job description is pretty clear. They can be tasked to do almost anything. I mean, even during a snowstorm that's coming up, I don't think this one will be a big one, but I mean, if you get stuck, you have to attempt to dig yourself out first before we come tell you, and that requires you to get out with a shovel and start shoveling snow. In the bad situations, often you may be working by yourself and expected to do something, move a heavy object. So,
and does the job description, is it the same throughout the entire department, or is there a different job description depending on where the individual is assigned?
So it's probably a better HR question, but having worked here, so the job description is generic to public works. So an equipment operator one in services would have very similar tasks to someone in utilities. And I don't recall the water plant having equipment operator ones. I think of equipment operator twos. So the job description is like a generic job description. I don't believe it exists anywhere else outside of public works. So someone in services or utilities should be, for the most part, interchangeable.
Okay, so there's not another equipment operator one job description within public works. It's just one job description?
Correct. Yeah, you can be assigned to any of the sections that are in services.
Okay. If an employee or a person who's applying for an equipment operator one position had a 10-pound lifting limitation, would they meet the requirements for the equipment operator one position?
No objection, Chairman, about the speculation.
Can you repeat the question, Ms. Berger?
I asked if an employee had a 10-pound lifting restriction, would they meet the requirements of the equipment operator one position?
Same objection.
I'm inclined to uphold the objection because you're asking Mr. Kuchnar to speculate, but I think you could ask him about what the job requires.
Mr. Kuchnar, are you aware of the medical restrictions that Mr. Johnson has?
Nothing recently. I remember his restrictions when he was on modified duty with us, and it was pretty limited. I don't remember exactly. I was shown something back then, I don't remember.
So
I know he was on modified duty because essentially he couldn't do the functions of an equipment operator.
Okay. So I think you touched on it a little bit, and I kind of want to go back. I apologize for jumping around. You mentioned a conversation or a request from Mr. Johnson about the landscaping crew.
Correct. Early on, he had asked about being assigned to that section.
And what was sort of the sum and substance of that conversation that you had with him?
He just had requested it. He thought when he was coming over, that's what he was being assigned to. And I explained to him, no, when he put his request in, he didn't ask for anything specific. And then he was assigned to, I believe it was asphalt. And that was pretty much the extent of it.
And what was your understanding in terms of any medical restrictions he may have had when he returned or when he came over to services on full duty?
He had none. It was full duty.
Let's see. So if there's a scenario where, well, let me start that. So what impact would there be on the operations of the services division if there's an employee who is either not working or they're on light duty for an extended period of time due to an injury?
It hampers our ability to get our job done. I mean, I can give you a good example. Right now, I have Mr. Johnson, the same situation he's been in. I have 2 other individuals on modified duty, and then I have several people on some use or lose time. We have a snowstorm coming in Wednesday, and I don't have sufficient personnel to put enough trucks on the road without utilizing going to utilities now.
Okay.
So it impacts. I mean, you can't have, we have job descriptions for a reason, and that's for the employee to do whatever they're tasked to do within their job description. I mean, that's an explanation I have.
All right. Do you recall how long Mr. Johnson was in working in a full duty capacity in that September of 2019?
I do. I'd recently looked that up. So it was, I believe he came to us full duty, transferred to us, and was in full duty on September 1st. And I believe his last date was right around September 27th, I believe.
Okay. So a little bit more than 3 weeks.
Approximately, if I have the date right. I believe the 27th was the date.
And has he, to your knowledge, has he worked in a full duty capacity since?
Not that I'm aware of, not with services.
I don't have any further questions.
Mr.
Hi, Mr.
Cockenour,
Foley.
thank you. Mr. Cockenour, again, my name is Mike Foley and I represent Mr. Johnson. Just a few questions today. Just to make sure I understand the hierarchy, back in March of 2020, was Miss Marcia Patrick, in terms of hierarchy, above you, same level or below you?
At the time, I believe she was above. I believe she was the acting director until March or April when Michael Johnson came
Okay.
to the position.
And that would be, I guess, one level in order, if that makes sense. Is that right?
Well, typically you have the director and then have the assistant director, which has typically been Marcia historically. And then you have the fleet manager and 3 superintendents. We report directly to the director,
Gotcha.
whether it's an acting director or a director.
And are you aware that Mr. Johnson worked with Dan Horath in fleet maintenance
As a full-time employee or
on light duty?
on modified duty? Yes. Dan had asked about utilizing him during his time with us.
So Dan had asked you about having Mr. Johnson work there.
Correct.
Do you know when he might have started that position with Dan?
I do not.
Do you know when he stopped working that position with Dan Horath?
I do not.
Is the fleet maintenance, is that comes under your supervision or?
It does not.
It does not. Okay. Are you aware of the job description or the job duties of the fleet maintenance?
I'm familiar. For quite a few years, fleet maintenance was under me.
Mhm.
I'm familiar with what the mechanics have to do, fleet maintenance mechanics.
Were you aware of what Mr. Howard Johnson did with Dan Horath in fleet maintenance?
Yes, I believe so. I believe that part of Mr. Johnson's assignment when he was on modified duty working under Dan was doing some inventory, I think labeling shelves. I believe that he drove vehicles around. I'm not sure if he took them for emissions tests. I can't swear to that. I believe he may have even picked up parts, but the parts would have been brought to the vehicle. So that vaguely, that's what I remember.
Okay. And when you say driving trucks, would that be like fire trucks and EMT vehicles?
No. I believe he was assigned when he drove like sedans.
Sedans, okay. But his job with Dan Horath, to your understanding, was not mere labeling. Is that right?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
To your understanding, Mr. Johnson's job duties with Dan Horath were not limited to only labeling with the inventory, correct? But involved other things like driving these vehicles?
Correct. That's what I stated.
And so, are you aware of who made the decision to have Mr. Johnson stop working with Dan Horath and to move somewhere else?
He was never assigned. He was detailed to Dan. He was always assigned to services.
But are you aware of who was the decision maker in determining when to stop Mr. Howard Johnson with his work with Dan Horath?
Oh, that would have been either myself or Dan.
Okay. Do you remember whether between the two of you who it was that made that decision?
I do not.
Do you remember, excuse me, strike that. Do you remember having any conversation with Dan Horath that Mr. Johnson needed to work in the office instead of continuing to work with Dan Horath?
Objection.
There's no basis. for that.
What's the basis? Yeah. Ms. Berger?
Can you repeat the question? I'm sorry. I may be withdrawing it.
Mr. Kochenauer, let me just repeat it. Did you have any conversation with Mr. Dan Horath that Mr. Howard Johnson can no longer work in the fleet maintenance with Dan Horath, but had to go to an office position?
I'll withdraw.
I don't remember anything about that.
You were asked earlier about landscaping, and I believe you testified, Mr. Johnson, there was he had an understanding that he might be getting this position with landscaping. Just to be clear, that landscaping, that would include like grass cutting crew?
To respond back to your comment, he had asked about the position after he'd been assigned to service. So the landscaping crew would be do a variety of things, but lawn mowing, weed whacking, removing debris, that kind of stuff falls in that job description.
Why was Mr. Howard Johnson not given the position with the landscaping or the grass cutting crew?
When he originally moved over, we had the vacancy in the mason crew, the asphalt crew, and that's where he was put.
Do you have any understanding of why he was not? I understand why he was given to the asphalt, but why was he not given to the landscaping or the grass cutting?
I don't know off the top of my head. It was just assigned to where the vacancy was.
Who did that assignment? Was that you or someone else?
It would have probably been Phil Cook and I discussing it. Ultimately, I'm responsible for the crews as a superintendent. So I would say ultimately me.
So it was you believe, who made that decision, but you don't remember why?
Probably because it was a vacancy. He didn't request it in his transfer. We just put him in the assignment.
But you were aware that he had asked for it?
No, I was not aware of that prior to his transfer ever.
So you testified earlier that he did ask for it. When did you become aware that he had asked for it?
It was like in his first week after he'd been transferred to us. I don't have the exact date, but I remember early on.
And so when you found that out, let's say a week after he started, why did you not move him to landscaping?
I don't know, other than we had the vacancy in that crew that he was assigned to, and that's where he was staying.
Did you ever tell Miss Marcia Patrick that Mr. Johnson could not pick the light duty job that he wants? It's up to you ultimately.
Pick the light duty job? I don't recall that.
Or any sort of modified job?
As far as?
That you told Miss Marcia Patrick that Mr. Howard Johnson could not choose his own job, whether it be light duty or modified, any sort of capacity.
I don't recall
that. Did you ever tell Mr. Howard Johnson that there was no more light duty work for him?
Not that I recall until he received a letter from the director.
Were you in any way involved in that that decision by the director, acting director?
Uh,
Other-
What decision are we talking about?
The March 5, the notice of intent to terminate. Mr. Kokenauer?
It's Kokenar, and no, I was not involved in the decision.
And the equipment operator one position, they work in crews, isn't that right?
Sometimes.
How many people typically to a crew?
Since COVID, there is no crew. They work individually. I assigned them separately so they wouldn't, be in close contact with each other. So essentially, they've been assigned individual jobs where if they're at a task, like recently, I'll give you an example with the landscaping crew, they were assigned to do a clearing at a cemetery. So they drove individually there and they stayed at least 6 foot apart as they worked.
What about under normal circumstances? I know this is a unique time, but in normal circumstances, how many people to a crew?
Sometimes it could be an individual. Again, we have people that go out individually. Sometimes it could be 2 people. I think the most we would have would be 4 people.
And would one of those people that's part of the crew be responsible for driving?
During that time, yes, there has to be at least one driver driving a vehicle.
And so you mentioned earlier that sometimes there's someone there, if they're in a crew, to help with lifting. Isn't that true that there would always be, assuming they're in a crew, always someone to help with lifting any items you described earlier?
If there was a crew, yes, I wouldn't argue that.
I'm just going to try to share my screen with you, Mr. Kokenauer, excuse me, Kokenauer.
Could you repeat? It's like I'm getting reverberation on your end.
Sure. I'm going to try to share my screen with you.
Okay.
Are you able to see my screen, Mr. Kokenauer?
Yes, it looks like the job description again.
Right. You were asked earlier on direct examination about this document. I see that there's different sections or called section heads. One says,
Okay.
I know this is a generic document or job description that you testified to earlier, but there's a section called required knowledge, skills, and abilities, acceptable experience and training, additional requirements, and then it's a section called Americans with Disabilities Act. You were asked earlier about the physical ability. Isn't it true that that description there is not under one of the sections that's called required skills or training or abilities?
It is under the Americans with Disability Act.
Okay, but you agree with me, it's not under the required knowledge, skills, or abilities, or the other additional requirement sections?
I would agree with you based on this document, yes.
Just a brief indulgence to make sure I'm not missing any other questions. Okay, nothing further.
I have just
Ms.
a
Berger? Yeah, go ahead, Ms. Berger.
Just a couple brief questions. Mr. Kokenauer, you're just testifying about pre-COVID, when crews would go out, there would be at least one driver. Now, would that driver perform other tasks associated or aside from just driving to and from the areas where they need to operate?
Absolutely. They would do the same thing the crew was doing, whatever the assignment was. They just don't drive and sit.
All right, so there wouldn't be a scenario where a person assigned to a crew could just be limited solely to driving the vehicle around.
Correct. I mean, I can give you an example. We have street sweeper operators. They drive their vehicle. I mean, we're still responsible for getting in and out of it and cleaning it. But that would be an individual who drives all the time. However, when other scenarios come up, they perform other tasks, debris removal, snow removal. And if the sweepers are down, which sometimes they are, they're assigned to different crews. They could end up in the asphalt crew or the landscaping crew, until their vehicle's fixed, repaired.
So, and during your testimony about the landscaping crew, is there any heavy lifting that's associated with the tasks that the landscaping crew performs?
Sure. I mean, they load and unload the walk behind, right behind type of lawnmowers, large ones. I mean, they take off lawnmowers and weed whackers too. We had one assignment I briefly mentioned earlier. We were assigned to help do a clearing in a cemetery, and that was a lot of cutting and dragging up hills and ravine areas by hand. So, I mean, that's an example of something heavy that the landscaping crew would do.
I have no further questions.
Just
Go ahead, Mr. Foley.
thank you, Chairman. Mr. Kokenauer, are you aware of whether or not Mr. Howard Johnson's medical restrictions would have in any way impacted his ability to do the grass cutting job?
Once again, I haven't seen it in a while, but there's been discussion about a 10-pound weight limit. So that I would say would be a limitation.
Do the grass cutting, in that landscaping grass cutting department, we'll call it, do they work in crews as well?
Sometimes.
And just like in the asphalt, there would be someone there to help with lifting if necessary if they worked in a crew, correct?
Sometimes.
And just to make sure I understand your testimony with the equipment operator one, there are times where someone can just be driving the vehicle, but I think your testimony was when something comes up, that's when they would have to not just drive the vehicle, but do other tasks. Is that your testimony?
I believe Ms. Berger asked me a question relating to, is there a position where someone just drives to a location and that's it? That's not the case. So the landscaping crew, for example, pre-COVID, if we had a crew of 2, 3, or 4, someone drives the vehicle with the crew in there. But once they're on the job site, they all get out and perform whatever the task is.
Mm-hmm. Have you ever, do you know of any situations in where someone would do the driving, but once they get to the place of work, who does not do any of the tasks the other crew would be doing, but only drives?
Am I aware of such a position?
Are you aware of any instances of that happen?
I don't recall any.
Okay, nothing further.
I just want to clarify for the record, like council to confirm with respect to the equipment operator one job description, that was respondent number 24, correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Berger, you can proceed with your next witness.
All right, the next witness is going to be Marcia Patrick.
Okay.
I'm
Patrick?
free to go, or
Yes, thank you, Mr. Kopenauer. Apologize for wrangling your name.
Bob's
Thank you,
good.
Bob.
Thank you.
Ms. Patrick, I just want to remind you, you're under oath. Are you muted? Can you speak up? I just want to make sure. There we go.
Can you
We
hear
hear
me? Okay,
Yes, we can hear you
sorry.
now. Okay, very good. Go ahead, Ms. Berger.
All right, can you state your name for the record, please?
My name is Marcia Ann Patrick.
How long have you worked for the city?
I worked for the city of Annapolis for 32 and a half years.
And what is your current job title?
My current job title is Assistant Director of Public Works.
And did you have that title on March 5th, 2020?
At that time, my official title was Acting Director of Public Works. I was performing the duties of both positions.
How long were you the acting director?
In this particular instance, from, I believe the date was February 3rd until our new director, Michael Johnson, started, which was in July. I don't remember the exact date.
And do you report to the new director, Mike Johnson, directly?
Yes, I do.
Okay. So how long have you, if you can tell me, how long have you held the position of either assistant director or acting director of public works?
Since about 2006.
And are you familiar with Howard Johnson?
Yes.
How did you come to be familiar with him?
Well, to start with, I'm somewhat familiar with most of our employees. Public Works has about 100 employees. I do approve all payroll, so I know the names. Sometimes I don't know the faces. I don't remember when I first met Mr. Johnson. I've known him for some time. He's a very nice, friendly man.
So the questions that I'm going to be asking you today are limited to sort of after February 1st, 2018, where Mr. Johnson had a hip injury. At that time, were you involved in handling personnel matters when it comes to employees getting injured in the process of returning them back to work?
Yes.
Do you, after that injury, recall when Mr. Johnson came back to full duty?
After which date? I just want to make sure.
February 1st, 2018.
After February 1st, 2018, he did not come back to work until July 1st, 2019.
Okay, was he in a modified duty for that time period?
When he went out for his surgery, he did not come back for modified duty until July 1st, 2019. And at that time, he did begin on a modified duty status.
Okay. And then after July 1st, when did Mr. Johnson return to full duty?
He returned to full duty September 3rd.
And did he ever ask you about getting transferred to a specific crew or being assigned to a specific crew?
I don't know whether he did or not. I mean, he may have. I've been in this meeting, so I've heard him say that. So he certainly may have. I don't have a specific recollection of it.
Is the personnel assignments or I guess the crew assignments, is that a decision that's left to you?
No.
Who usually makes those decisions?
The supervisor of the employee in association with their superintendent of whatever division they happen to be in.
Okay. And as you said, you've been part of this hearing since this morning. And so there came a time where Mr. Johnson, he came back on full duty on September 3rd, 2019, I believe, correct?
Yes, yes.
Approximately how long was he on full duty for?
He was on full duty for, I think 16 work days.
Okay. When did you become aware that Mr. Johnson had suffered another injury after returning to full duty in September of 2019?
I don't remember when I specifically would have been notified of that. It might have been during the payroll process. Or supervisor or superintendent could have mentioned it to me. But it would have been, at some time after that.
I'm going to show you, Hillary, if you can pull up respondent 14, please.
One moment.
Thank you. Okay, Ms. Patrick, does this document look familiar to you?
Yes.
And you received this from either, who did you receive it from?
I actually don't recall who would have given it to me. Occasionally they're given to me by our office associates. Sometimes they're emailed to me by various people. I don't recall how I received this one.
Okay, but you received this duty status report obviously after September 27th, 2019.
Yes.
Mr. Johnson's physician. Hillary, if you can scroll down to the recommendations. Now, if you want to take a second to read that, do you recall the recommendations from Mr. Johnson's physician?
Yes.
Now, Hillary, if you could go to respondent 16, please. I'd like to draw your attention to another duty status report.
I'm sorry, 16?
Yes. Okay. Ms. Patrick, do you recall receiving this duty status report as well?
Yes.
And I believe this is the one from Dr. Dabbs. And you received this around the time that it had been issued, or I guess around the time that Mr. Johnson had seen Dr. Dabbs.
Yes.
So after you received the duty status report from both Dr. Mess and Dr. Dabbs, what sort of next steps did you take?
Well, I generally talk to their supervisor or their superintendent to see if we can accommodate their requests.
Okay, and in this particular instance, the requests being, or the recommendations being from both Dr. Mess and Dr. Dabbs that Mr. Johnson undergo medical retirement, what was the next step that you took?
Well, at that time, I would have a conversation with our Human Resources Director, Tricia Hopkins, as to assist me as how to best, if it's very difficult to accommodate somebody in Public Works with that asphalt restriction, because I don't think there's a position where you wouldn't possibly be in the position of nailing asphalt fumes. So it would be up to the employee at that time to discuss with Human Resources a disability retirement. But at that time, I requested an independent medical evaluation, an IME, from Tricia Hopkins. And that's so that the employee would be evaluated for, see if they're able to return to the duties of their position.
Okay, Hillary, if you could put up respondent 17, please. Okay. Does this document look familiar to you?
Yes,
And what is this document?
that is the independent medical evaluation.
And do you know what doctor conducted that?
Yes, that's Stanley Friedler.
Drawing your attention to at the bottom of page 4. So Hillary, I think you're on to, yeah, you could scroll down just a little bit. Oh, okay. And then to the top of page 5. Let me know if you need to read that to familiarize yourself.
I'm familiar with that particular section of the IME.
Okay, so what was Dr. Friedler's recommendations after he evaluated Mr. Johnson?
That it was unlikely that he should be working in a position that is not relatively sedentary in nature. And he would always have a weight restriction in the range of 10 to 15 pounds.
Okay, and did he put any other sort of restrictions? Looks like in the next sentence.
Yes, he's unable to tolerate repetitive stooping, squatting, and bending.
Okay. So do you recall what you did on the basis of this IME that Dr. Friedler, or this IME report that Dr. Friedler furnished?
Yes, I began drafting a intention to terminate letter.
Okay. So are you familiar with the job description or the general duties of a equipment operator 1?
Yes.
Can you sort of give just a general overview, since there's already been testimony to that effect, but kind of the general responsibilities that equipment operator ones have?
Okay. First of all, we have, I don't know the exact number, but we have many employees in that same position, equipment operator one, and they could be asked to do a wide variety of tasks, which could include, driving vehicles to a work site and then performing any type of manual labor that we might need them to perform. Example, filling potholes or working with the utility crew and digging holes and replacing whatever might need to be replaced.
Is the job description for the equipment operator one the same across all the divisions of Public Works?
Yes, it is.
And are equipment operator ones expected to do all of the duties required of them in the job description?
Yes, they are.
So you just briefly touched upon drafting a notice of intent to terminate. So I want to get into why you drafted that letter. So why did you decide that termination was the next step for Mr. Johnson?
If an employee is unable to physically or for any other reason perform the duties of their position, they're no longer qualified for that position.
And
sorry.
I'm sorry. And did you feel that the IME it rendered Mr. Johnson unable to do the duties of the position of equipment operator one?
Ms. Berger, let me interrupt you for 1 second. I think we lost one of the members of the Civil Service Board who was on the call, and I just want to make sure we can get him back. I suspect it's technical difficulties. Here we go. I just saw him trying to call in. There he is. Sam, are you back with us? Just hold on a second. Sam, are you there? I know that's his number. Let's just give him one more second. Sam, as soon as you're on, will you confirm that you can hear the testimony? Sam? I saw him type his name, so we're moving in the right direction.
I did that.
Oh, okay. Again, I suspect he's trying to rejoin the call. Sam?
I'm here.
All right. Did you miss a lot? Do you know? Do we need to go back?
So my phone might have indicated that I was not here, but I am here. I heard everything that was said, so no, I didn't miss anything.
Great. Just
In
wanted
fact,
to. Go ahead.
Phone.
What was that, Sam?
Hold on one. Yeah, hold on 1 second, please.
Mm-hmm.
Welcome to Zoom. Enter your meeting ID followed by pound.
Did we lose him again? All right. Just yeah, I don't see him on.
We've lost him. Oh, he's coming back in, I think.
Okay.
Different
Yep,
number.
yep, yep.
1 sec.
Hello.
Sam, you're back.
Yes, I'm here. Sorry about that, everyone.
Okay. We're just going to go ahead and continue with Miss Marcia Patrick's testimony. Did you hear most of her testimony or all of her testimony?
No, I caught what she was saying. I'm fine. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. My apologies for interrupting, Ms. Berger. Let's go ahead and proceed. Go ahead.
No problem. Okay, so Ms. Patrick, why did you decide to terminate Mr. Johnson?
Because the independent medical evaluation indicated that he was not expected to be able to return to full duty with regard to ability to perform the physical requirements of the job.
And did you discuss the decision to terminate him with anyone?
Yes, I did. I discussed it with our director at the time, David Gerald, our human resources manager, Tricia Hopkins, and the city attorney's office.
Were there any discussions or consideration of vacant positions that may have been that were available at the time the decision to terminate was made?
Yes, I discussed the available positions in the Public Works Department with Ms. Hopkins.
Hillary, if you could put up respondent 19, please. Okay, is this document look familiar to you?
No. I
Do
mean,
you
I've seen it in the, in the exhibits, but this is not a document that I would typically see.
Okay, so if you, Hillary, go to the next page, I want to draw your attention to, you are not the one that made these markings, correct?
No.
Okay. I want to draw your attention to position. It says 11907 Office Associate 3, and it has 3 little asterisks next to it. And then there's another one that says 11728 Office Associate 4, which has 3 little asterisks next to it. Do you know whether Mr. Johnson was qualified for either one of these positions?
I'm sorry, let me just state my objection, Chairman, is that the witness seems to have testified she's not personally aware of this document, but yet she's being asked questions about it, and I object on that ground.
Well, she did testify that she had conversations about vacant positions with the HR director. So I'm asking if this is one of those vacant positions that were brought up.
You're asking.
I think you can ask her about her recollection of the conversations, but if she's never seen these position vacancy description reports prior to today, I'm not sure she's the right witness to ask about them.
Okay, Ms. Patrick, do you recall a vacancy for an Office Associate 3 position?
Yes.
Do you know whether Mr. Johnson was qualified for it?
So that Office Associate 3 position, we did not intend to fill as an Office Associate 3. That was added to the Public Works budget out of the Stormwater Fund. We had originally requested a grade 10. We wanted a new position, and it would be to manage a street sweeping program that would, to get MS4 credits. I don't want to go into too much detail because I know nobody is that familiar with it, but that's the stormwater, like the Clean Water Act. There's many components of that, the requirements. We have a permit that's issued by Maryland Department of the Environment that we have to meet many requirements. And one of the ways we could meet them is by doing curb to curb street sweeping. And we don't currently do that because we would have to post no parking signs for certain, a day a month or whatever, so that you could do the curb to curb street sweeping and do limited parking and working with neighborhoods. It would require some effort to set that up. And that position of Office Associate 3, it does not suit the needs of the department. So during the budget process this past year for FY 2021, current year, I had requested a new position, a higher grade than that, and it was not filled. But at the time, it was a position, we didn't intend to fill it as that position because it didn't suit the needs of the department.
Okay. So is it correct that with the exception of from September, we'll say 2nd to September 27th of 2019, Mr. Johnson has been either on light duty or some form of leave since that February 1st, 2018 injury?
Since the 2018 injury, well, he did work a full duty a short period of time, but otherwise he was either working a modified duty assignment or on other type of leave that would accommodate a medical issue or a modified duty or sick leave or vacation or personal leave.
And during those time periods where he wasn't working full duty, was his equipment operator 1 position still occupied by him?
Yes.
What effect, if any, has his or Mr. Johnson's absence from physically being able to report to work for the equipment operator 1, what effect has that had on operations?
So we have goals and objectives and performance measures we're supposed to meet with regard to a large variety of issues, and it would definitely impact our ability to meet our performance goals. It causes some undue hardship on the rest of the people in that position who have to fill in and try to take up the slack, so to speak, for whatever's not being performed by the employee who's unable to perform the duties of the position.
And based on what you know of Mr. Johnson's medical restrictions and the job description for the equipment operator 1, do you think or do you feel that Mr. Johnson can perform the job duties of an equipment operator 1?
No.
I have no further questions.
Hi, Mr. Foley.
Thank you, Chairman. Ms. Patrick, my name is Mike Foley, and I represent Mr. Howard Johnson, and thank you for being here today. You mentioned, I apologize if I'm kind of jumping different categories of questions, but take it one at a time. You mentioned on your direct examination that the equipment operator 1 position often works in, there is a lot of people who work as operator 1 in that position. Do you know how many people currently occupy that position?
I should know that number, and I'm sure I have it written down somewhere. I do have, I don't think this is an exhibit. I have this list of everybody in Public Works. I could do a quick, like in the streets division, there are, I think the streets division alone has, I don't know, somewhere between 12 and 15. And there are, and that's the bulk of them are in the streets division, but they are also in other divisions such as utilities, and there are a few in a few different divisions there.
Would you say that there's over 20 equipment operator 1s within the city?
I would say yes.
You were also asked earlier about the IME with Dr. Friedler. Was that IME requested on behalf of the workers' comp case?
Objection.
I know I requested that.
Hold on. Just a second. Go ahead, Ms. Berger.
I'm objecting on the basis of relevancy.
Irrelevant.
So hold on a minute. So we're talking about what exhibit are we talking about again?
I believe it's 17.
Right, Dr. Friedler's IME.
Friedler's IME. And Ms. Berger, if I recall correctly, Ms. Patrick testified that she saw that report, correct?
That's correct. I was objecting to the basis of the workers' comp testimony or characterization.
So can we proceed with questioning without making a reference to the workers' comp case?
Chairman, just because she was asked questions about this and it appears the report on the very first page mentions the workers' comp case, I'm just trying to figure out the process of which this was requested. I think it's very relevant to the procedure in this case.
Okay, Ms. Berger, we'll note your objection for the record, but I'm gonna permit the questioning to continue. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman. Again, Ms. Patrick, was this IME requested for the workers' comp case?
The only thing I can tell you about it is that I sent an email to the Human Resources Manager, Tricia Hopkins, requesting an IME. I don't know that she could have also had another request that I'm not aware of.
I understand. I'm just trying to understand your motivation because you asked for the IME. Was that for the workers' comp case or for another reason?
No, I did not ask for it for the workers' comp case. That actually moves to the risk management division. Within the city, I asked more for the workload of our crew. Every single position we have, we need. And when it remains, when there's someone in the position that can't perform the duties of the position, it creates a hardship on the department.
And that's why you requested it.
Yes.
So back in March of 2020, I believe you testified you were the acting director of Mr. Johnson's department, correct?
With the Department of Public Works.
So you would have been the department director in effect at the time of March 2020?
Well, the acting director, but yes.
Who's personnel director? Who would have been the personnel director at that time?
Well, I believe her title is Human Resources Manager, and that would have been Tricia Hopkins.
And so I just need to understand the process and your procedure. So you requested the IME, and then I believe you testified earlier that you then had a conversation, I believe with a gentleman named Dave Gettle.
I've never heard the name Dave Gettle before.
I'm sorry, I believe you mentioned a few people you had a conversation with. One was Ms. Tricia Hopkins, one was the city attorney, and there was another name.
David Gerald. Okay, so David Gerald was the director of Public Works until he became city manager, and he assumed those duties in I believe it was early February of 2020. So while he was still director of Public Works, I would have had that conversation with him.
Do you remember sending during this process prior to drafting prior to issuing the notice of intent to terminate, do you remember sending anything else to Ms. Tricia Hopkins regarding Mr. Howard Johnson and his future with the city?
You mean via email?
Via any means.
Well, I don't have a specific recollection of sending something to her or not sending something to her at that time. I am in frequent contact with her because we have 100 employees, and I talked to her a lot, and I could have had a conversation with her. I don't recall specifically.
Okay, so I just want to make sure I understand your testimony, Patrick, because this is very important. So you request the IME, I believe you testified you got the IME, and then you had a meeting with Dave Garrell, I believe his name was, and Ms. Tricia Hopkins, correct?
I did not. I don't know if I had a meeting with them. I never said I had a meeting with them. I said I may have discussed it with David Gerald. It's Jarrell.
Okay, and so there wasn't just one meeting; it was conversations you might have had with these two individuals.
Possibly. I will say I can't remember every day of that month. So I frequently had conversations with both of them, and they certainly could have included conversations about Mr. Johnson.
Okay. Did you do anything else? I just want to know your process here. Was there anything else that you did or submitted or had done prior to issuing the notice of intent to terminate Mr. Johnson prior to issuing it?
Can I ask for a specific time frame if you have one in mind? Or are we talking all the way back to Howard Johnson's date of hire?
I mean, from the time the IME was requested of Mr. Johnson until the time of the March 5, 2020 notice of intent to terminate. Was there anything else that you did procedurally other than request the IME, receive the IME, and maybe have some conversations with Ms. Tricia Hopkins and Mr. David Gerald?
I'm confused about your question because I need to know what I did have conversations with them. and they would have included Mr. Johnson and the IME. I mean, I would not make the decision to terminate without, talking to both of them, seeing if there were other positions available. It's not a decision that is taken lightly. It is my least favorite part of the job.
Did you ever send Ms. Tricia Hopkins anything about the attendance record of Mr. Johnson prior to issuing the March 5, 2020 notice?
What do you mean specifically?
Anything about his attendance record?
Like, I'm confused. Why? I mean, I don't understand what you're asking. We do keep attendance records for every employee. She has the ability to review in our payroll system someone's work record. We do keep additional files in Public Works. I may have sent her something. I don't recall.
Okay. But sitting here today, you don't recall, it's a yes or no question, sending the attendance record of Mr. Johnson to Ms. Tricia Hopkins prior to the notice of intent to terminate, correct?
I don't recall whether I sent that or did not send that.
Okay. And sitting here today, you can't recall apparently submitting anything else to Ms. Tricia Hopkins prior to the notice.
Off the top of my head, no, I cannot recall what I sent to her and what I did not send to her at that time.
And you were asked earlier in your direct examination that since his February 1, 2018 accident, until the notice of intent to terminate, that he only worked for a short period of time. I think your testimony was this full duty position, and the rest of it was there are other times where he was on modified or light duty work. Isn't it true he was also, there was significant periods of time since February 1, 2018 until March 5, 2020, where he was either recovering from surgery and off of work or on short-term disability?
Yes, the short-term disability is what I was referring to for other types of leave.
Do you know how long he was on short-term disability?
No.
Do you know how long he might have been off of work, either recovering from the injuries or recovering from surgeries?
So I believe that this document is part of the record, and it's our employees' daily attendance record. This is what I would refer to make those determinations. So I don't know what number the document is in the.
Not exhibits, I don't believe.
But that's what I would refer to, because like I said, we have 100 employees. I can't remember everybody's exact work record without looking it up.
Understood. But you agree with me that there were times during the 2.5 years, or pretty much 2 years from February 1, 2018 until the notice of intent to terminate in March 2020, that he missed, he was either recovering from injuries or surgeries or on short-term leave, correct?
During some of that time, yes.
Okay. And do you recall having any conversation with Mr. Howard Johnson about him working with the grass cutting crew or landscaping crew?
I heard him say that in his testimony, and I certainly could have. I don't have thorough recollection of it. I did talk to Mr. Johnson numerous times during his employment.
And so I understand that you could have had the conversation. Remember ever telling him that he could step into that position?
Okay, so I would never presume to know exactly what a supervisor or superintendent needs his crew or her crew to do. So I would never say, I might say something like, I don't have any objections to that. If that works out for that supervisor, that would be fine, and it meets your, physical limitations. But I would never say specifically, oh, yes, you can go do, fill in the blank for anything. I would not do that.
Do you recall having any objections to Mr. Howard Johnson going to the grass cutting or landscaping crew?
Objection.
think it's
your
very,
basis, Ms. Berger?
She testified that she doesn't make that decision. That's not something that's within her purview. So I don't see the relevancy of the question.
Mr. Foley, what was your question again?
if she stated any objection to Mr. Howard Johnson moving to the grass cutting or landscaping crew, because Ms. Patrick just a moment ago testified that she would never say some things, but she would state an objection.
I guess I'm kind of thinking she just answered it's asked and answered, isn't it?
She has not specified whether or not she stated any objection to him moving to the grass cutting crew.
I mean, I'll allow it, Ms. Berger. We'll note your objection. Go ahead and answer the question, Ms. Patrick, if you can, if you know the answer.
So the answer to that question is, I would say it needs to be within what your supervisor and superintendent need, the work that needs to be done. And if you have any physical limitations, it can't violate them.
And are you aware of a gentleman named Mr. Albert Johnson who works with the landscaping crew?
Yes.
Are you aware of whether or not he retired in the last year or two?
I believe he retired.
And when he retired, are you aware of any vacancy in that position when he retired?
Well, I think, we're going on my memory now. I can't remember if he was an equipment operator 1. He may have been an equipment operator 2. I don't recall. We often have vacancies in those positions. As I said, we have a lot of them.
Do you know when it might have been when he retired?
I don't recall the date.
Are you aware of a Kevin Mackle or Mackle? Kevin Mackle?
Yes.
Are you aware if he was placed in that position?
I don't know.
Objection. What position are you talking about?
The grass cutting crew. Just to be clear, Ms. Patrick, you don't recall?
No. And and I will say this, those would all be Bob Kokenar would be able to make all of those decisions because each of those positions are under his purview.
Okay. And so it would have been Mr. Bob Kokenauer who made the determination of whether or not, let's say, Kevin Mackle, for instance, was in the grass cutting or landscaping crew.
I would presume.
Do you know if that happened in this case, if he made that decision, or did you make that decision?
I did not make that decision. I can't tell you who made that decision.
Are you aware of whether or not Mr. Howard worked in the office in the months just before his termination, his notice of intent to terminate was issued?
In what office?
In the Gorman Street office?
I don't believe he was working in the Gorman Street office at that time, but he came and went a lot. So I can't tell you, but I believe I heard earlier in this testimony that he was working for Dan Horwath at that time.
Are you aware of what was his position at the time of the notice of intent to terminate that was issued?
Equipment operator 1.
I mean, in terms of light duty or modified job.
Well, I believe I heard Dan Horwath say he was working for him at that time.
Are you aware of any other job, light duty or modified jobs he worked after Dan Horwath, before the notice of intent to terminate?
I don't know who he was working for at that time.
And so, if you didn't know who he was working with at that time, how did you come to the conclusion that there were no jobs available?
Objection.
Your basis.
I'm not sure I understand the question. What type of jobs are we talking? Are we talking about light duty? Are we talking about full-time positions? What?
Any job availability. I think it's a critical question.
What was your question? Can you restate your question, Mr. Foley?
Sure. If you were not aware of what position he was in at the time of the notice intent to terminate was issued, how could you come to the conclusion that there was no job availability in the city?
Because he was working on a modified duty assignment at the time. I am not the person who makes a determination as to whether there's a job in another department. I am not familiar with other jobs in other departments. I can only tell you what he is qualified to do in public works.
Okay. And are you aware whether or not Mr. Johnson, excuse me, strike that. Are you aware of Mr. Johnson's, or were you aware of Mr. Johnson's CDL status at the time of the March 5, 2020 notice of intent to terminate?
I don't recall if I was aware of his CDL status at that moment or not.
Do you ever recall being notified or informed of his reobtaining his CDL license prior to the March 5, 2020 notice of intent to terminate?
I don't recall whether I was notified or not. And in fact, I barely recall that he lost it. I did not recall that until I heard it in the testimony today.
Mm-hmm. Brief indulgence. And Ms. Patrick, prior to you issuing, excuse me, let me step back. The March 5, 2020 notice intent to terminate, that was something you drafted, or was that something that someone else drafted?
I drafted it. I would send it around for review by our Human Resources Department, our Office of Law, but I drafted the letter.
And prior to you drafting and issuing that notice of intent to terminate, did you give Mr. Johnson any opportunity to get a passenger endorsement for his CDL?
Because Public Works does not have any positions that require a passenger endorsement, that is not something that I would do. That doesn't mean that someone else in the city did not have that conversation with him.
Okay, and so which, if any job that would require a passenger endorsement did not fall under your purview under the Public Works, which department or purview would that fall under?
Well, I'm not familiar with every job in every other department, so I'm not sure. I would assume transportation has some of those jobs, but there could be another department that has one. For example, Recreation and Parks might, but they may not. I don't know.
And just to be clear, when you drafted and issued the notice of intent to terminate, as you testified earlier, you're not really the one who knows about all the positions and vacancies and job descriptions, but I believe you testified to Ms. Hopkins, correct?
Correct.
And so did you have any conversations with Ms. Hopkins about job placement prior to issuing the March 5, 2020 notice of intent to terminate?
Yes.
Objection. That was asked and answered.
I don't believe it has, Mr. Chairman.
Repeat the question.
Sure. Did you have any conversations with Ms. Tricia Hopkins about job placement prior to issuing the March 5, 2020 notice of intent to terminate?
Ms. Berger, he may have asked, but I don't remember the answer. So
I asked it on direct.
Did you? Okay. You
can answer it again.
Thank you.
Ms. Patrick, go ahead.
I had a conversation with Ms. Hopkins about positions that could be available for Howard, and specifically in Public Works. And I I can't specifically recall whether she asked about that or not, about other departments she may have. I know we've had discussions over the years with a lot of different employees about a difference between equipment operator and a bus driver, and the physical duties required for both.
Did you ever have any conversation with Ms. Hopkins prior to issuing that March 5, 2020 notice of intent to terminate about job availability outside the public works and some other departments?
I may have. I honestly, I can't specifically recall. At that time, I was performing the assistant director and the director job. So I'm trying to recall. I mean, I would always, with an employee that we're going to terminate, I would always have a conversation about other positions that he would be qualified for, specifically in public works if we had one. But if she would ask me any questions about other departments, I would be more than happy to have any discussions with her that she would ever want to have.
Okay, thank you. But sitting here today, as it relates to this specific case, can you recall having any such conversation with Ms. Hopkins?
Counsel, I think she answered the question.
Okay. We'll let the record reflect that. Ms. Patrick, did you ever, prior to issuing that notice of intent to terminate in March 2020, did you ever sit down or have a conversation with Mr. Johnson anytime regarding what he needed in terms of any sort of accommodation to perform the equipment operator one job?
Yes.
When was that conversation?
Oh, I had many. I can't give you a date, but I can assure I had that conversation with him.
How many different conversations were there?
I can't recall the exact number. He was an employee in public works for a long time.
And just to be clear, your testimony is, I want to make sure I'm clear that my question is relating to anything after his February 1, 2018 injury. You're saying you had conversations with him about accommodations after that February 1, 2018 accident?
I believe I did. I am trying to remember. I mean, I had many conversations with Mr. Johnson about his ability to perform the duties of his job. And I would say, I believe I did, but I can't give you a date because I don't recall.
Do you remember what he asked for in terms of what he would need in terms of accommodation to perform that job?
He was very good at having his doctor submit the duty status report, and each one could be slightly different. And I would have conversations with him, especially if he was performing a modified duty assignment, about it, and whoever might be supervising him at the time about what he can and cannot do to make sure we didn't violate any of those restrictions.
I understand that you received the medical reports, but did you have any conversations with Mr. Howard Johnson about what he needed to
Yes.
But you don't remember when that occurred or how many times that conversation took place?
Some of that time Howard was working in our office, and I would talk to him on a regular basis. So, but I can't recall specific dates of specific conversations. Am I not answering your question?
I think you are. I don't know the answer to your question. I'm just asking if you have a specific recollection of having any sort of conversation with Mr. Johnson about accommodations he would need to perform that job.
Holly, I think she's answered the question several times now.
Ms. Patrick, I'll move on, but I'm assuming your answer was that you had that conversation, just don't recall when or how many times that occurred. Is that right?
I would say yes.
Okay. Did you ever have a conversation with Mr. Johnson prior to the notice of intent to terminate about what he would need in an accommodation for any other job outside of equipment one operator?
Objection.
Basis?
I feel like we're here on a somewhat limited, there's a somewhat limited role here, and this is starting to get into a different line of questioning. The termination was based on Mr. Johnson's ability to physically perform the job functions of an equipment operator one. Ms. Patrick has testified ad nauseum at this point about conversations that she's had about vacant positions within public works specifically, and the potential for other conversations that were vacant at the time this notice of intent to terminate had been issued. Now we're getting into what other type of, how could he be reasonably accommodated for other positions that he may or may not have been qualified for? And that's, I don't think, the role of the Civil Service Board to be assessing, because it's almost like it's another little mini hearing within a hearing.
I'm going to agree with you, Ms. Berger. Mr. Foley, I don't know if we can move on, or if you can rephrase your question. I'm not exactly sure what you're trying to get at, but I feel that the witness has answered your questions. If you, I guess, give it one more shot. Try to rephrase the question, but otherwise, let's see if we can't move on. I'm not sure the point you're trying to make here.
And Mr. Chairman, just to be clear here, under the codes of the city regulations, prior to terminating, there has to be an analysis about job availability within the city. And I understand she's testified about his position as equipment operator one. I'm just inquiring about other positions within the city. And that's why I believe it's very relevant.
So it's your understanding of the law that the city has to evaluate if he could perform the duties of any position working inside the city?
Correct.
Okay.
Job availability within the city, not necessarily with his specific exact job title.
Not necessarily with respect to the equipment operator one, correct?
That's my, yes.
Go ahead and ask Ms. Patrick, see if she can answer. If you could
Yep, thank you. Just to rephrase my question, did you ever have a conversation with Mr. Johnson about accommodations he would need in any other job other than the equipment one operator?
I had that type of conversation with him with regard to positions in public works, because those are the positions with which I am familiar.
Okay, and do you recall what the substance of that conversation was?
Well, it would have been relative to the positions that were open at the moment, and whatever time that would have been. Most positions that are open are actually labor positions at any given time. The other positions often require an engineering degree or, educational requirements that I know Mr. Johnson doesn't have.
And so was there any specific jobs that were discussed outside of equipment operator one?
There may have been, and I would have been more than happy to discuss any position that was open at the time. Any position that's open is advertised to all employees, and employees have the, we interview employees, or do a skills test or whatever to determine if they're qualified before we would take anything outside of the city, or definitely in public works.
Are you aware of an employee, Mr. Eric Bauer?
I'm going to object.
Take your basis, Ms. Berger.
Again, I think this is starting to we're getting into comparative language, and what we really need to be focused on whether or not Mr. Johnson could perform the functions of the equipment operator one position, and everything associated with Mr. Johnson only, not other employees.
Mr. Foley, what do you have?
Just going to the point, Mr. Chairman, that other employees have been given greater ability to take modified or light duty jobs. Again, it goes to show the fact that job availability was available within the city. And so I tried to ask Mr. Johnson that question, and there was objections, and I was told to ask the question to other witnesses, so I'm trying to do that now.
Ms. Patrick, go ahead and answer if you can.
I am familiar with Eric Bauer.
Do you know what his position, or his title position is with the city?
Yes, it is. He works at our water treatment plant. Oh, no, I think he transferred since then. He works in the utility division, and his current job title is equipment operator 3.
Do you know if back in March of 2020, if he was an operator one, equipment operator one, or was he some other position you just described?
I don't remember what his position title was at that time.
Let me just see if I have any other questions real quick. Okay, nothing further.
Berger, redirect?
Just a couple of questions. Ms. Patrick, you were asked on cross-examination if you sent Trisha Hopkins Mr. Johnson's attendance record. Did you discuss with her, the various instances of leave or modified duty that Mr. Johnson had been on at the time you requested the IME?
Yes.
Okay, so she was fully, well, I'll ask her. And at the time of the March 5th, 2020 letter, Mr. Johnson was on light duty at the time?
Yes.
Okay. Does the Department of Public Works have a full-time light duty position?
No.
That's all.
Nothing further.
Okay. We started at around 12:30. It's 2:08 p.m. now. I'm going to suggest we take a 5-minute bathroom break, and then Ms. Berger, we can resume with your next witness.
Okay. I will let Mike Johnson know that he should log on.
Okay, perfect. So we'll resume in 5 minutes. If you could just turn off your cameras, mute your microphones, and it's coming up on 2:10. This will be back here by 2:15. Very good. Thank you. Mr. Callahan, you there? Sam, you there? Ms. Berger, we're waiting for Mr. Johnson. Is that correct?
Yes, he knows to log on.
Okay, great.
He's here.
Okay. Hold on just a second. I want to make sure Mr. Callahan is on also. Mr. Callahan, are you here? Can you hear us? You send him a quick email.
Hello.
There we go. Thank you, Mr.
Hello, I'm
Callahan.
here.
Perfect.
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you. All right. I see we have Ms. Beard, Mr. Foley. I think we have everyone we need. So go ahead, Ms. Berger. Continue on with your case.
All right. So Mike Johnson, right?
Yes, absolutely. Mr. Johnson, just a reminder, you're still under oath from this morning. So Ms.
Yes,
Berger, go ahead and
understood.
start
Thank you.
your direct examination. Go ahead, Ms. Berger.
All right. Good afternoon, Dr. Johnson. Can you state your name for the record?
Michael Johnson.
And what is your current job title?
I'm the Director of Public Works for the City of Annapolis.
And how long have you been the Director of Public Works?
5 months and 1 day.
Can you, just for the Civil Service Board's identification, can you tell them where you worked prior to getting this job?
Yes, I worked for the City of Gaithersburg. I was the Director of Public Works with them as well.
For how long were you the Director at Gaithersburg's Public Works Department?
About six and a half years.
Okay. When you began working in the City of Annapolis, was there an occasion on which you were briefed about Howard Johnson's status?
Yes.
What was the sum and substance of that briefing?
It was brought to my attention that Mr. Johnson had a medical condition that rendered him unable to perform in his duties of an equipment operator 1, and that as the director, I was required to have a hearing with him and to make a determination as to whether or not he was able to continue performing in that function for the city, with the city. Excuse me.
So there came a time where you had a hearing with Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Do you recall? Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I had a hearing with him on September the 10th of 2020.
Okay. Do you recall what Mr. Johnson indicated to you that his physical abilities were in order to perform the functions of the equipment operator 1 position?
During the hearing, he did mention that he'd had some medical issues and that, he felt that he could return to work. This answer. Yes, and that was what he had said during the hearing.
Okay. And what was your ultimate decision with regards to Mr. Johnson's employment status after the informal hearing?
Based on the, reviewing the file and the medical testimony in the file, the medical record, Mr. Johnson did not appear to meet the minimum criteria for the position of equipment operator 1. So my determination was that he should be discharged from service.
Okay, so are you familiar with the job description for equipment operator 1?
I am, yes.
Hillary, if I could ask you to put up respondent 24. Okay, thank you. Is this the only job description for this position, the position being equipment operator 1?
That's the only one I'm aware of and that I've seen.
Okay. Now, if you look at the Americans with Disabilities Act in the physical ability section specifically, where it says strength and agility sufficient to lift and maneuver heavy objects such as heavy tools and equipment to 100 pounds, excuse me. What does that mean to you? What is that portion of that job description?
The equipment operator's job is one that requires, you know, an ability, you know, it's a requires strength, and you know, they're not just operating equipment. There are many other tasks that they are required to do, so that on occasion it is felt that they would have to move up to 100 pounds, and there are tiers of weight, but all of those exceeded the amounts that were which he was medically cleared to move.
Okay. If you could give sort of like a rough estimate, how frequently would an equipment operator have to lift or maneuver a heavy object?
You know, most of the time it would be, I would say, more than 60% of their time would be involved with moving.
Mr. Johnson, I'm sorry. I did not realize I was on mute. I was trying to state an objection. Excuse me. There's been no testimony about his personal knowledge about what an equipment operator does. He has no basis for his understanding of how often they might do something. And so I was trying to object and I realized I was on mute, but I wanted to state my objection to the question.
Any response?
Well, I mean, he indicated, first of all, he has quite a background in public works in general, being the director of a different department in Gaithersburg before coming to the city, but he also was briefed on Mr. Johnson's status specifically, and he said he was familiar with the job description for Equipment Operator 1 and the functions that go along with him.
I'm going to allow this line of questioning. Mr. Foley, I would suggest this is something you could take up on cross-examination.
All right, thank you.
You may continue, Mr. Johnson.
Yes, okay, thank you. Yeah, for the equipment operator position, they're required to move tools, required to assist with offloading the load that they carry to the site, and you know, the weights that they are required to move. More than 60% of their effort involves moving heavy loads, moderate to heavy loads.
Now, there's another part that says to climb into and operate large equipment, trucks, etc. What does this sentence mean to you?
The operator has to be able to climb up into the dump trucks or the payloaders, the front end loaders, which have many steps. They're sort of have big tires. They're large pieces of equipment. And during the normal execution or discharge of their functions, that operator has to be adroit and able to get in and out safely of that piece of equipment several times during their tour of duty.
Okay. So does an employee have to be fully capable of meeting the physical requirements of the position description for the Equipment Operator 1?
They do, yes.
And why is that?
Because the equipment operator is a very important element of the workforce of the city, and they're given a myriad of tasks which involve physical, visual, hearing, speaking, crawling, crouching, climbing, balancing. All of those attributes the employee must have sufficient ability to do to safely perform their duties in operating the heavy equipment.
Okay. Next, Hillary, can you pull up Respondent 21, please? I'm going to go back to the informal hearing that you touched upon it with Mr. Johnson, and how you testified that you reviewed the file, and what I guess part of the file did you review in making your determination?
Can I answer?
Yes.
Can I answer? Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. I reviewed the medical finding from the physician, in which they the doctor made a determination of, restrictions that would be required to be imposed on Mr. Johnson were he to return to work. And based on that, it did not meet the minimum requirements of the position, and that informed my decision.
So drawing your attention to what Hillary just brought up on the screen, which is respondent 21, was this one of the records that you reviewed? Believe
I
it.
can't see the top.
Scroll up just a
Can
little.
you scroll up a little bit to see if
It has the date on there.
the date? Okay. Yes, it is. Correct.
And so this was a duty status report that was it's a duty status report coming from Mr. Johnson's physician, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And so as you can see, it says 0 hours of climbing, bending and kneeling and running, and then a 10-pound pushing and pulling limitation and a 10-pound lifting and carrying limitation.
Correct.
So was this one of the documents? I'm sorry if I already asked this, I think it did, but was this one of the documents that you took into consideration when you were making your decision on termination?
Yes, it was.
Okay. So based on, and what other documents did you consider?
I also looked at the work record. The department has a work record, and the work record showed a protracted period of time during which Mr. Johnson was not at work. And, it seemed to be a problem when I looked at that. I didn't quite understand why he is away from work for that length of period of time.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No, that's it.
Okay. So what's the effect that a long-term absence of an employee due to injury has on Department of Public Works as a whole?
Well, it takes up a position that we need. For instance, when we have a snowstorm, we have to have equipment operators to drive our plows and our loaders, for salt loading, lifting snow, loading snow, pushing snow. And a person, if we have a position that is vacant for that protracted period of time, it does affect the manning and therefore the efficiency of the department as a whole.
Okay. And so based on the restrictions, Mr. Johnson's restrictions that are enumerated in this duty status report and the requirements that are stated in the job description, do you believe that Mr. Johnson's able to meet the physical requirements of an equipment operator one position?
I do not believe he is able to meet the requirements of an equipment operator one position.
That's all the questions that I have.
Foley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Johnson, my name is Mike Foley, and I represent Mr. Howard Johnson in this case. You mentioned that you are now the director of Public Works. When were you hired?
I was hired on July the 13th. My first day was July the 13th of 2020.
Okay. And earlier you testified that about in terms of the equipment operator one job duties, that I think your testimony was that 60% they would have to be lifting of the time, they would have to be lifting heavy things or loads. Isn't that your testimony?
Somewhere in that range, yes. It's typical. It's typical for that. Pardon me?
What's your basis for that statement?
I've been in Public Works for more than 20 years. First as an assistant director, operations chief, then before I became a director. And I'm intimately aware of the duties that different titles are required to do. Public Works departments are fairly similar, and therefore the job expectations and requirements are pretty much the same across departments.
So I just want to make sure I understand your testimony is that you were the director up in Gaithersburg, and that's you're saying the job up there is the same here?
Well, and before that, I was the director in a New Jersey municipality, and the equipment operators in New Jersey, and the equipment operators in Gaithersburg, and the equipment operators in Annapolis, and in other departments are pretty much the same in terms of what is required to function in the job.
in the respondents exhibit where she showed you the job, we'll call it, the job description, I believe the title of it is. Do you know if on that document says anything about lifting 6% of the time heavy loads?
It doesn't give a percentage, but it does speak occasionally, frequently, and constantly. I think that's in the job description. And there are different weight tiers that are provided within that. It probably would never be written in terms of percentage, because that would be a problem during the collective bargaining process to actually demarcate that. But the question did ask what percentage, so I gave my experience, and based on my experience, what I felt the percentage is.
Okay, just to be clear, that your experience would have been in Gaithersburg in New Jersey, correct?
Objection.
Asked and answered, Mr. Foley.
And Mr. Johnson, in making your decision to uphold the intent to terminate, I believe you testified that you reviewed the IME. You testified he did not meet the minimum requirements for the position, and that you looked at Mr. Johnson's work record, I believe you stated, and you had a hearing. Was there anything else that you reviewed prior to issuing your decision to uphold the termination?
No, those were the documents that I reviewed, that I used during my conversation during the hearing, and then subsequent to that to make my determination, to uphold the determination.
And this work record that you reviewed, how did you get access to that, or did someone give that to you?
Yeah, as the director, I would have access to the work records for all staff. It's something that is kept in the department. So I would just look at that normally as part of my own preparation prior to any form of hearing, disciplinary or otherwise.
Okay. And you testified just a moment ago that you reviewed the IME about how it didn't meet the minimum requirements. You looked at the work record that was available to you. Did you review anything about job availability?
Job availability? No, I did not review. I'm not sure I understand what job availability. What do you mean?
Any documents about what available positions were with the city?
No, I wouldn't have information on that. I mean, that would be a different department. I wouldn't know the answer to what jobs are available within the city.
All right, thank you. And did you have any conversations with Mr. Johnson prior to your decision upholding the intent to terminate? Conversations with Mr. Johnson about what accommodations he might need to be able to do the position, the equipment operator one job?
No, I did not.
And did you have any conversations with Mr. Johnson prior to your decision upholding the intent to terminate? Did you have any conversations with Mr. Johnson about what accommodations he might need to do jobs outside of the equipment one operator that might be available to the city?
No, I did not, because as mentioned, I don't know the details of jobs that are outside of my department.
Okay. Okay, nothing further.
Berger?
Very briefly, Mr. Johnson, would you allow for a employee to meet some requirements of a job description but not others?
I would not.
Is there an operational effect on certain restrictions that employees may have in terms of lifting or any sort of physical tasks that are associated with the equipment operator one position?
I want to state my objection, Mr. Chairman, that this is really speculative and hypothetical.
I'm asking based on his experience.
Can you restate the question, Ms. Berger?
I was asking if there's an effect on, or if it's, I could say in your experience as a public works director and having worked in public works for over 20 years, is there an operational effect when one employee does not meet the physical requirements of a job description.
I'll allow it. Go ahead, Mr. Johnson, answer if you can.
Yes, there is. Every the Manning table that the department has, it correlates very closely to the amount of work output that can be done. And public works staff tend to work in teams. So if you have a team member who is not able to perform the duties of the position, it has a deleterious effect upon the efficiency, operational efficiency, and productivity of that team, and therefore the department as a whole.
Okay, no further questions.
Nothing further.
Ms. Berger, do you have any more witnesses?
I have Trisha Hopkins as the last witness.
Okay. Can somebody get in touch with Ms. Hopkins? Thank you, Mr. Johnson. We appreciate your testimony today.
Thank you. Should I leave now?
Yes, you're dismissed. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Hillary, are you reaching out to Ms. Hopkins?
I sent her a text message.
Somebody, okay, great.
Okay, she said she's logging on.
Ms. Berger, is this your last witness?
It is.
Okay.
Tricia's here.
Ms. Hopkins, just want to remind you that you are still under oath from this morning.
Yes.
Ms. Berger, please proceed.
All right, good afternoon, Ms. Hopkins. Can you state your name for the record, please?
Tricia Hopkins. Human Resources.
And what is your current job title?
Human Resources Manager for the City of Annapolis.
Can you just describe your general responsibilities as the HR manager?
I oversee the entire human resources function for the City of Annapolis, which includes many things. Oversee classification and compensation, training, benefits administration, recruitment, employee relations, federal law implementation, collective bargaining for the City of Annapolis for all 4 bargaining units. I could go on and on, but that probably is a decent summary.
Okay. Are you familiar with Howard Johnson?
Yes, I know Howard well.
I apologize for my dog making her presence known in the background there. Can you describe for the Civil Service Board sort of your role in the matters that have involved Mr. Johnson?
A number of things. I obviously consult on employment-related matters, and when there are situations where employees are needing modified duty, or they have the department has concerns about the person's ability to perform their full duty functions, I'm often consulted on how we handle the employment-related matters. Obviously, for benefits administration, if individual employees are in need of leaves, time off, paid time off, and have other concerns that way, and also to the extent relative to the administration of the pension benefit, that would also have been another reason for my consultation.
Okay, so in general, at what point does the fact that an employee has been injured, would it come to your attention as the HR manager?
Usually if the time off is extensive, that it's not, a matter of somebody being out for an illness that they recover from and return, but when it's a protracted absence and there is information, which sometimes is conflicting information, sometimes clear, that decisions are made from based on medical assessments, then I'm involved in those.
Okay, do you recall when you were notified or sort of brought in the decision-making process with regard to Mr. Johnson's medical situation?
Well, there's been a number of them during his career, and I have been consulted on them. They had hip-related issues, and in his work with DPW, those absences related to that were ultimately associated with surgery that started last year in 2019. In February of 2018, actually, it's probably when that began, and then dealing with modified duty placements even ahead of that, as we awaited surgery that ultimately occurred on February 22nd. And then subsequent to that with absences related to a back injury.
So,
But-
go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say there's other history with Howard that were with a different department, but relative to Public Works. That's what we were dealing with, was back in February of 2018.
Okay, so since February of 2018, were you in some form or fashion kept up to date on Mr. Johnson's medical status and his restrictions?
Periodically, yes.
Now, did there come a time where were you consulted on the decision on the issue of on the issuance of the notice of intent to terminate?
Yes.
Can you describe what your role in that process was?
Well, there's a number of things that happen. Any request for evaluation of an employee relative to their ability to do their job, there's a request that should be made to the HR manager to determine if the person's medically capable of performing that or another job, their own job or a different job. And I also make sure that if I have knowledge of a workers' compensation claim, that there's also coordination with risk management and workers' compensation information, so that any request is also taking into account maybe some ongoing comp-related actions that may be impacting as well.
Okay, so you mentioned something about alternate employment. That wasn't the exact use of words, and I apologize, but you said something about suitable, I believe, employment.
Yeah, we also want to make sure if we have medical information indicate a person's not going to, they're either at maximum medical improvement and those restrictions are permanent in nature, or that they're for the foreseeable future, that they're not going to be able to perform the position that they are currently assigned to. I look through, I typically run vacancy reports. I look through the vacancies that we have, the information that I have is regard to restrictions I consider, and also try to get to a point where there's an opportunity to determine if that person could perform those duties going forward, that it would be a better match essentially for the individual.
Now, would you start looking at vacancies before medical treatment has been completed?
It really depends on the kind of information that we have. I mean, a lot of times you'll have individuals that have gone through a surgical process and there's a recovery period, but you have to evaluate the information you have to date to determine if there's a likelihood. So it's kind of a gut level scale as to whether it makes sense to look at it now or just hold off and look later. But I do periodically run those vacancies reports and take a look at them to see if there's a potential. And because because recruitment is a non-static situation in the city, you know, jobs are always being posted and filled, and then there may be jobs or, you know, position vacancies that aren't going to go forward. So with my knowledge of that, I have to take that into account as well. And then I try to be ahead of any formal processes of selection so that there's a better chance of placing an employee that might be able to fulfill one of those roles.
Okay. So what do you consider when you're assessing whether there's a vacant position available?
Well, all of our job descriptions have beyond description of work, job tasks. They also include physical and mental abilities sections to them. So when a person's been evaluated medically, you get your duty status reports in part where, are they climbing, reaching, stooping, are they able to do that? Are they able to lift pounds at a certain number, according to a certain number? Are they otherwise restricted in some of the physical demands of their current assignment? And then that's good information actually to compare to job descriptions for vacancies that we have in order to determine if a person really would stand a chance of being able to safely perform the duties of those vacancies. Now, ultimately, you want that person to get a release from a doctor to be able to say so, but it's still already good information from which to compare to some specific language that's in each of our job descriptions.
Okay. Hillary, if you could put up respondent 19, please.
Okay, so since I'm looking at this on my phone, can you tell me which? Is this the March 5th?
Yes, this is a position. It's titled Position Vacancy Report, and then it looks like it has the report run date of March 5th.
March 5th. Okay, I have it in front of me, so I can see it a little bit larger.
What prompted you to run this vacancy report?
Well, this is the point at which we had already been through an independent medical evaluation that we received from Dr. Friedler because of the workers' comp case, as well as having medical information from Howard's doctor. But what prompted that is there is the language that was in the medical evaluation from January, let's say it was Dr. Friedler saw him on January the 28th. And then then we had to get his report physically before us and meet. And so Dr. Friedler had said in his report that he had a weight restriction, a lifting restriction, that he couldn't bend, stoop, squat, and that he needed to be working in a position that did not utilize that, could be different from those restrictions. And so with that information, I ran this report and looked at the vacancies that we had. Now, sometimes the vacancy report it's at a point in time that hasn't caught up with maybe departments are already extending job offers. People are going through all of the onboarding part and they're not literally in the system yet. So I have to know all of that. On this report, I also noted which positions had degree requirements associated with them. I looked at, clearly public safety positions, uniform services positions are too physically demanding. And so a number of my crossouts are going to be related to that. Specialized requirements, certification processes or training or other kinds of skill sets that are needed. I look at them as well. I noted on the bottom of this, I have all these lovely little asterisks that are tied to kind of the force required. So what we see in our job descriptions they identify whether a position is light, medium, heavy work. And then what's associated with that is lifting and other kinds of physical requirements. And so I looked at which positions required 50 pounds of force frequently, what they required infrequently, and then those that required, in Howard's case, it was a 10-pound lifting restriction, and what kind of positions that would even be possible in. And so there's that physical requirement. And so that's easy. You get that out of the way, you know what those are, and you eliminate positions on that basis. But then there's also the minimum qualifications that have to do with experience and other kinds of skill sets that the position requires.
Okay, thank you. So drawing your attention to it's where Hillary has it is good, but I don't think you can see it. So on your second page on the report,
Yeah.
There are a couple positions that I want to ask you questions about.
Sure.
There's one that starts with 11907, Office Associate 3, that has 3 asterisks next to it. Do you recall whether or not Mr. Johnson was qualified for that position?
No, that position required experience. This is a like a journey level position in our office support positions. And there are technological requirements, meaning that those individuals who perform those jobs are managing data. And typically that data is managed through Excel spreadsheets or through other kinds of specialized computer systems. That position is, let's see, 460. That position was also working with Munis and their workforce. I think it's called Works, their tracking systems. And so you look at it's not a matter of being able to perform some of the duties, it's a matter of being able to perform the functions and therefore qualify. So I believe that position, it looks like it's in stormwater management. I believe that position was also in the process of being filled.
Okay, so then directing your attention to the one that's 11728, Office Associate 4. It's the very last one that's on the report. Do you know whether Mr. Johnson was qualified for that position?
Now, that is a higher level than the Office Support Associate 3. So that's requiring an even higher level of experience related to data management and administrative support to individuals in higher level positions. This is in Recreation and Parks. And as I recall, this position was actually the funding hold for a position they have had for a number of years that they have filled contractually. So it was not being recruited for. They were not seeking to fill that position because they were using the allocation associated with it to fund their contractual position that they had on board in their administrative offices.
Okay. And then a couple above that, one that says 10156, Bus Driver 1. And it has asterisks next to it. Was Mr. Johnson qualified for that position?
Well, then now we're back to the physical requirements. Now they both equipment operator and bus driver require a CDL license. When you are a bus driver, you also have to have the passenger and the air brake endorsements, which I can't imagine when we're trying to make an accommodation that we wouldn't attempt to figure that out. But the bigger concern here was that this is considered medium work. And as the asterisk says, it requires up to 50 pounds of force occasionally. But then there are also requirements that are climbing, crawling, crouching, kneeling, pulling, pushing, stooping. And they use those kinds of skill sets because the job tasks associated with bus driving is not just getting behind the wheel, but they're also responsible for cleaning the bus, and they're responsible for pre-trip inspection. So they're going to have to crouch down. They're going to have to, do a visual of the bus to make sure it's in good working order. And so there's going to be crouching and kneeling and then climbing to make sure that the bus is operational before they head out. And then report back to maintenance if there's a need for the bus to have to be checked out before safely operating it. And those are considered essential qualifications.
Okay. So, and then last one is 10150 bus driver 2. Same question. Is that a position that Mr. Johnson was qualified for?
Exact same reaction. I mean, the difference between the 1 and the 2 is training and being the higher level responsible position in that series. But it's all of the things I described related to physical requirements of the job and job tasks are the same between the 2.
Okay. So were there any vacant positions on this report that Mr. Johnson was qualified?
Unfortunately, no. I mean, I tried my best to find something that was going to work, and unfortunately not on this vacancy report.
Okay. Hillary, if you don't mind going down to respondent 23. Trisha, I'm not sure if you're going to be able to see the document since you're on your phone, but this is another vacancy run report or position vacancy report. Excuse me. Hillary, can you scroll down just a little bit for me, please? And it was generated on September 15th, 2020.
Okay. I'm going to pull that same document up on my computer here. Just give me a second. Okay.
So what prompted you to run this position vacancy report?
Well, again, we were at a space and time where there's a termination notice, and I want to make sure that if there's an opportunity for the person to work in a different position, that I've turned over those stones.
Okay, and on this report, were there any vacant positions for which Mr. Johnson was qualified?
Unfortunately, no.
Moving on to, I'm going to show you respondent 25, which is the rules and regulations. Specifically, I believe it's section 517.
This is disability separation.
Correct. Do you need a second to review this? Okay. So are you familiar with this section of the rules and regs of the personnel system?
Yes.
Okay. Did the Department of Public Works, when they involved you in various conversations, and as sort of things progressed through Mr. Johnson's status, did the department adhere to the rules and regs that are stated in section 517?
Objection, Chairman. Maybe we can have some specific questions, but just a general question about complying with the codes and regulations. Without specific questions, I find not proper testimony.
Why would it not be proper testimony, Mr. Foley?
just the blanket question, did you comply with the rules and regulations of the city? I mean, perhaps that goes to the weight of the testimony, Mr. Chairman, but I claim or object to the questioning and phrasing that it's improper.
Berger, could you rephrase that question?
Sure. Hillary, if you could scroll down just to the next page, please. Specific to section 517A, requesting a medical evaluation. Did either Marsha Patrick or any member of the Department of Public Works, did they reach out to you and submit a request to schedule a medical examination to evaluate Mr. Johnson's ability to perform the functions of an equipment operator one position?
Yes.
Did you receive as part of that request a copy of the employee's job description?
Yes, I received that request and I did have his job description.
Okay, and were you given a list of specific tasks that the employee performs along with the physical activities required of the job?
Well, that's all described in the job description.
Okay. Were you given Mr. Johnson's attendance record?
Well, we were well familiar with his attendance record and had stayed in communication about that. So I was already informed about that.
Were you provided with medical documentation from Mr. Johnson's physicians or, from Dr. Friedler? I think you mentioned, was that all provided to you?
Yes. Periodically, I was provided copies of his modified duty forms that were submitted through his doctor. And then we had been in consultation with our risk management representative to discuss the ongoing workers' compensation case. And I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, but when there's an independent medical evaluation request, I make sure that I have coordinated any evaluations with what is going on with workers' compensation, because it's oftentimes, not oftentimes, but I want to make sure that I'm not missing information that is provided through a workers' compensation evaluation, and that I have both medical documentation from the person's own doctor as well as from any city-sponsored evaluation.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to section 517B. Does that provision of the rules and regs describe the point at which you conduct the search for vacant positions?
Yes.
And did you do that in this instance with Mr. Johnson?
I did. That's the vacancy report that you see.
Okay. Now, does the city offer permanent light duty positions to employees?
No. I mean, that's a kind of a misnomer. Permanent light duty would not be accommodating them in their current job in kind of job duties that aren't consistent with that. The goal of finding other positions for which they're medically capable of performing, in some people's eyes might be considered a permanent light duty, but I consider that a job reassignment. And in some cases it's a demotion. It's not going to be a promotion. It might be a lateral or a lower level position when that works out. But I don't consider even that to be a permanent light duty arrangement.
Okay, so if someone is working in a light or modified duty status while recuperating from an injury, there's no expectation that they will remain doing those job tasks that have been assigned to them while in that status permanently.
Not permanently, no. Obviously, what we want to look for is whether that person is in a recovery mode, and there's a reasonable period of time has gone by to get that person to what they call maximum medical improvement, or a determination that they're not ever going to be able without restriction to perform the duties of their job. And so those are kind of the trigger points at which you want to be able to look for a different position, and barring that, to have have another outcome, which maybe that individual will qualify for disability retirement, or that person will, be able to find employment elsewhere, not with a city that meets their restrictions and is more gainful employment after separating from the city. But we would not put a person in a permanent modified duty status, because the goal here, again, is you're compensating individuals for the full duty assignment. That's how the grades are assigned to positions. It's based on the job task and the physical and mental requirements of a job. That's what helps determine its value. And if you were to modify a position such that it removed essential functions, it didn't require that person to perform essential functions, then you're really just not able to perform the work on a business level to get things done. I take a lot of pride in working really hard to find alternatives for people, and sometimes those alternatives, given the severe restrictions of their limitations, just makes it really difficult to find something that is gainful employment.
I understand. You mentioned disability retirement. Who makes the decision on disability retirement?
It depends. If it is somebody that's a member of the police or fire retirement system, then that's a city-sponsored retirement plan. Everybody else is and we are in the Maryland State Retirement System. So those rules apply. Because we are a member of the state-sponsored plan, it's not our determination at the city level. It is, we are a conduit. We can provide all of the information about what the state needs to consider in making those decisions, but it is out of our hands. Those decisions are made by the established methods and rules of procedure that the Maryland State Retirement System has in place.
Do you know whether Mr. Johnson ever filed an application for disability retirement?
I know that he consulted with Lori Gardner, a benefits administrator, on a number of occasions. And I know that Lori, carefully explained what the state requires is with regard to information for filing those papers, that he would need to file them with us. And to date, that has not occurred.
Okay, I have no further questions.
Mr. Foley, please.
Ms. Hopkins, again, my name is Mike Foley and I represent Mr. Johnson. Thank you for being here today. Just a few brief questions. You mentioned earlier about the bus driver position, the bus driver one specifically. You mentioned there was some lifting of 50 pounds. Are you aware of what in that position would require lifting 50 or more pounds?
Well, they are required to assist disabled patrons. So they may have to lift, help the individuals on and off the bus. They may have to put their wheelchairs on and off the bus. Are we getting some feedback? Is that?
You can continue. Can you hear us?
What did you say?
I said if you can just finish. You stopped.
Yeah, I was getting some feedback. So yes, the 50 pounds, I don't know if you heard everything I said, but the 50 pound is associated with disabled patients and maybe lifting their wheelchairs. And sometimes they have to put their wheelchairs on the back of the bus, for attachment, and then get them down again and assist those individuals.
Okay, thank you. You mentioned that you had the job description for the equipment operator one position.
Yes.
Who did someone send that to you? And if so, who?
Oh, I have all of these at my disposal.
Okay, so you already had it at your disposal. Did Miss Patricia Marcia Patrick send you the job description?
Marcia Patrick sent an email which included the job description, but I also already had the job description.
Okay. And did she send you any other documents at any time related to the possible termination of Mr. Johnson?
Well, I mean, that's kind of broad. I mean,
Any other documents for your review of Mr. Johnson's termination?
yes. The modified duty forms that were turned in to Public Works were provided to me as well. Any
Are you-
medical information provided to Public Works was shared with me.
Just to make sure I understand your testimony, was that she sent you an email with the job description as well as you got the medical records, including the medical restrictions. Is that what you're referring to?
Yes.
And you said earlier that you were already informed of Mr. Johnson's attendance records. I want to make sure I understand your testimony. Ms. Patrick, she never sent you the attendance records, correct?
Because Mr. Johnson had been on administrative leave continuously from on here. There was not a change in his attendance status from I think he started on administrative leave on the 5th of March.
That's when the intent to notice to terminate was issued, I believe, if you're referring to the March 5, 2020 notice. I'm just asking, did Ms. Patrick, ever send you the attendance record of Mr. Johnson prior to March?
Yes.
She did?
Yes. Yes.
When was that?
Several emails. February 13th, 2020.
That was not submitted as evidence in this case. This was an email from Ms. Patrick to you?
Well, I'm looking at a detail and it's I'm sorry, I can't pinpoint that communication. I did not know you were going to ask that question, so I don't.
I'm going to object at this point because the question was asked and she's acknowledged that she received Mr. Johnson's attendance record. I'm not sure why the date at which she received it is vital at this point.
Yeah. And again, all attendance related matters, I can run reports in our payroll systems. I have everything I need to refer to, but the information that we considered included attendance, included as the point at which he was working and the points at which he was not. That combined with the medical information provided by his doctors and through any independent medical evaluations that were performed are all part of the record, all part of the consideration.
Okay, thank you. And so did you have any part in the decision of issuing the intent to terminate?
I'm not the appointing authority.
Okay.
That is a role of Mr. Johnson.
Did you ever give authority to Ms. Patrick to draft the notice of intent to terminate?
I am not the appointing authority. I'm advice and counsel from a human resources perspective.
I understand, and I appreciate that, but just a yes or no, it seems like you were not you did not give any authority to Ms. Patrick to issue the notice of intent, correct?
I'm going to object. That's been asked and answered.
She has not answered, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick,
I believe she has, but I'll let you ask it again.
just for clarity, Ms. Hopkins, again, you did not give any authority or approval to Ms. Patrick to draft or issue the notice of intent to terminate, correct?
I am the Human Resources Manager. I am not the appointing authority for the department. My give advice and counsel and make sure that we are following our legal guidelines and our policies.
I can continue asking this line of questions and force her to answer, but I'm just going to assume, make it clear for the record, I believe she's saying she cannot give any authority or approval. Let me just see if I have any other questions. And Ms. Hopkins, just, I know you're the HR manager, but could you also be described as the personnel director? Is that the same?
Yeah. It's the equivalent.
Thank you. Okay, nothing further.
Berger?
I don't have any questions.
Okay, well, I'm gonna do something kind of unusual here, but just for the sake of trying to have a good, clean record here. Ms. Hopkins, can I have you take a look at respondent exhibit number 24? Do you have a copy of the exhibits in front of you by any chance? And Mr. Foley and Ms. Berger, if you would both look at respondent number 24.
You're gonna have to give me a chance here to
Sure,
search.
I think it's getting pulled up here. Do you see it on the screen? It's being shared right now.
Is that the equipment operator job description?
Yes. Can you go to the bottom of that page? All right, go to the next page. Okay, stop right there. Is that the complete job description? Or are we missing a page? For equipment operator 1.
It should be 2 pages, 3 pages in length.
Okay. Ms. Berger and Mr. Foley, do you have a copy of the equipment operator 1 description that's 3 pages in length somewhere in your files?
I do.
No?
I can certainly look for it. That's
wait.
the that I had. So
Wait a minute. Sorry, just a minute. Just give me a chance here. It's only 2 pages in length. That should be the
Okay.
entire.
I'm going to make the suggestion if council will agree to it. Ms. Hopkins, could you possibly send a copy of the 2-page equipment operator description, which as I understand would be the complete description of the equipment operator 1? And if you could send it by email to Mr. Foley, Ms. Berger, and to the Civil Service Board, then I'm going to suggest that we take a brief 15-minute break to give everybody an opportunity to review it. I just want to make sure that Ms. Berger, you don't have anything further you want to bring out with respect to the 2nd page that appears to be missing from the exhibit package. And I also want to make sure Mr. Foley doesn't have any additional questions. Is that, is our council agreeable to that approach?
that's fine.
Mr.
Okay.
Foley? Ms. Hopkins, could you do that?
Yep, I'm doing that right now.
Okay.
Do I
So-
include Hillary in that?
Yeah, please,
And Dee?
send it to Hillary, send it to Ms. Beard, send it to Mr. Callahan if you have his email address, which I'm sure you
I
do.
do. I do.
I don't know if you have Ms. Wood's email address. If you don't, I can forward it to her. Actually, do you have Mr. Foley's and Ms. Berger's?
I definitely have Carrie's,
Okay.
Ms. Berger's.
Tell you, Ms. Creek, are you on the Zoom? Are you there?
I am.
Okay, why don't you send it to Ms. Demetria Creek, and we'll have her, I know she's got everybody's email address, have her just send it to everybody.
Okay, I got you.
Can you do that, Demetria?
Absolutely.
Okay, excellent. So
By
it's
everyone, we're talking everyone on this call.
everyone on this call, Ms. Wood, Ms. Beard, Mr. Callahan, Mr. Johnson, Ms. Berger, and yeah, shoot, if you have Marsha Patrick's email address, send it to her too. And
Okay.
same thing with Mr. Johnson. Again, I just want to make sure that we don't end up with some sort of an issue where we have to come back another day because we didn't have this full position description.
Okay.
Okay, so I've got 3:21 now. How about we reconvene at 3:40, 15 minutes to give everybody a chance? Are you okay with that, Mr. Foley? I just want to make sure you have an opportunity to review it and
Yeah.
talk to Mr. Johnson about it.
Yeah, 20, I guess it's 19 minutes away. That's definitely enough time.
Okay, thank you. So Hillary, how do we want to do this? Can we just mute our microphones and mute our video and we'll come back at 3:40?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah, I'll
Sam,
Meeting
Mr.
running.
Callahan?
I'm here.
Okay, so we're going to come back at 3:40.
All right, that's fine.
Okay, all right, thank you. And if there's an issue, Ms. Creek, let me know. Go ahead and send me a text.
Okay.
Okay, all right,
Yes.
see everybody at 3:40. Thank you.
I'm still waiting.
Thank you, Demetria.
Roberto,
Yes, ma'am.
I only got one page.
Yep. I went ahead and asked Demetria to get in touch with Ms. Hopkins and send them the 2-page description. So hopefully we will be getting that shortly. Demetria?
Yes, sir.
If you could call Tricia and tell her that if she's having an issue obtaining the description at 3:40, just come back and we'll just check in and see where we're at in terms of getting it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, ma'am.
my understanding is, and I might be wrong on this, is the portion that's on the second page is actually at the bottom of the first page. It's just formatted uniquely.
If we can verify that, from my perspective, we're good to go. Just ordinarily, as you know, as a member of the Civil Service Board, we review a lot of these, and they're usually 2 pages long at least.
Well, that brings me to my next part. I have just recently become aware that there was a approved sort of update to the Equipment Operator 1 job description from the Civil Service Board a few months ago or a little bit earlier this year. That is not the one that is in evidence. It's a bit of an expansion of the previous one, sort of fleshes some things out, but I wanted to make you aware that that's something that just came to my attention, is that there is another job description that was in effect, but didn't come to be in effect until recently.
Let's hold off on having any further discussions about this until Mr. Foley comes back on, and then we can talk
Sorry,
to
I
him.
thought he was back.
That's okay. I think he's still off. And Ms. Hopkins, just sit tight for a minute till Mr. Foley comes back, then you can fill us in on what the deal is.
Okay, I will.
So I have 3:39. I imagine he'll be on in just a moment. Mr. Callahan, can you hear us? Are you back on?
I'm here.
Oh, excellent.
I'm here.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you. Mr. Foley, thank you for coming back. Ms. Hopkins,
I'm here.
can you, is there a second page to the description, or is it just,
I
is that
think
the
what's
entire?
happened, Chairman, is that the second page it's showing, it's one line on mine. It's just one line. So that last line is appearing on the bottom of your one pager.
And what is that one line?
That one line is, hang on here. The one line has to do with the mental health requirements.
Is it freedom from mental disorders, which would interfere with?
Yes, freedom
Okay.
from mental disorders, which
Okay.
would interfere with performance of duties as described.
All right, so then I believe this description appears to be, so this is the whole description. Now,
It's odd on my computer. It drops it to the second page, but you clearly have the whole document.
okay. So Ms. Hopkins, this was updated. It says 10/05, that's October 2005, according to this particular document.
Yes, I don't know why I'm not hearing you very well.
Can everybody else hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. So yes, this was updated in October 2005.
The particular one that you're looking at is dated 2005.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, Ms. Berger, I believe you indicated that this equipment operator position was updated recently you just found out. Can you explain?
Yeah, I just found out that within the last few months, the Civil Service Board approved an update to the Equipment Operator 1 position, which sort of it seemed, and based on, I just looked at it briefly, it pretty much just kind of fleshes out some of the requirements, but it in general has the same overall requirements that are associated with the Equipment Operator 1 position that we have been operating off of for this hearing.
Mr. Foley, what would you like to do? Would you like to see that update? I don't know to what degree that new description was used with respect to your client's case. Again, I just want to try to make this as fair of a process as possible. And probably at a bare minimum, you should look at that equipment operator revised position description, and probably what we should do is add it to the record as the last exhibit to the respondents' exhibits, perhaps. Do you have access to that updated description, Ms. Berger?
I do. I just got it, and I can send it to whoever right now.
So again, what I'm trying to do, it's 3:43. I'd like to see if we can't still finish up closing arguments today, but I want to make sure that we give Mr. Foley some time to review this and see if he needs to, if you need to request a continuance, whatever we need to do. I want to make sure we could do it, but if we can take care of the hearing today, I'd like to do that. So Ms. Berger, I guess send the updated position description to Ms. Creek and then send it to everyone on Ms. Creek, send it to everyone. Are you okay with that, Mr. Foley? Would you like to proceed in some other manner?
I guess it's the only way. All the testimony today has been based off that document. So I guess I don't know when that became effective, but certainly I think it might be necessary to see it. Hopefully it doesn't require revisiting any testimony.
I'll leave that to your discretion, but I think the first step is to take a look at it. So Ms. Berger, get it to Ms. Creek, and Ms. Creek will get it to everyone. It's 3:44 now. I'm going to suggest we touch base again at 4 o'clock and see where we're at. And if you need, Mr. Foley, if you think you need more time, we can make it 4:15, but
4 o'clock is fine as long as I get the email soon.
Okay.
Is it necessary to keep Ms. Hopkins on the line?
I think perhaps it might be, because you might have some additional questions for her, or we call her back, whatever you'd prefer.
Whatever's easier for her.
Okay, let's just keep her on the line then. All right, Ms. Berger, go ahead and send it to Ms. Creek, and we'll reconvene at 4 o'clock. All right, thank you, everyone. Jennifer, did you get the new description?
I got it, but I couldn't look at it because I would have to disconnect again. And
Okay.
every time I disconnect, I'm
Okay,
troubled.
no problem. Yeah. Then
But I
don't-
will
don't.
be able
It's,
to look at it.
Yeah. It's, we, this was revised in, January 7th of 2020. So, but now it's gone from 1 page to 3. And I don't know what Mr. Foley's going to say, but we'll find out.
Okay. That was under Tony Christoph.
No, January 7th, 2020. No, this year.
Oh, were you there then?
Yeah, I was.
But why would we have had that much to say about going from 1 to 3 pages?
Oh, well, I think it was just the recommendations that somebody somebody made.
Oh, okay.
But I knew when I saw this, I'm like, wait a minute, this doesn't look right. This looks like something's missing.
Yeah.
But this one that's part of the evidence may actually be the only one that's relevant to the case. So, what I was hoping to do is create a situation where Mr. Foley had every opportunity to look at it and ask whatever questions he wants, so we don't have to come back another day or.
Has it been sent out yet?
Yes.
No, I don't have it. This is Cheryl.
I'm going to
Okay.
forward it to you right now.
Thank you.
Yep, you bet.
So at the end of this,
Mm-hmm.
are we going to set a time to meet or talk amongst ourselves?
I think we're going to have to. I think what we should do, I'm going to request, assuming we can finish up today, I'm going to request that the council submit proposed findings of fact and conclusions of law. And then we're going to have to, I think we're going to have to schedule a meeting. We'll go through the proper procedures so we can have a closed meeting to conduct deliberations, and we'll kind of figure out what we think the right call is. So that's my suggestion. I mean, I thought if it was clear cut and it's like we were all in agreement, but this one's complicated.
Just an FYI, you guys are live currently.
Yep. Okay. Yeah. So we'll make sure that we're in compliance with the Open Meetings Act, do everything by the book.
Yeah.
Sam, are you back?
I'm sorry about that, Roberta. Sam is here.
That's okay. That's okay. Great. Mr. Foley, I take it you received it?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Okay, Ms. Berger's back. Mr. Callahan's here, Ms. Beard is here. Mr. Court Reporter is here. Mr. Foley, you now have the updated position description, as I understand, based on what it says at the bottom of the document. Apparently it was updated January 7th, 2020. And how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman, I don't think it's necessary to recall any witnesses. I just think it goes again to the weight of the evidence and the massive amounts of irregularities in this case, and that because this was adopted, it looks like before any of the intent to terminate was even issued. And all the witnesses that testified that have been asked about it have testified that they reviewed the 2005 version, not the version that should have been reviewed. And so while I don't think it's necessary to recall any witnesses, I just ask that be taken into consideration with the irregularities in this case.
Would you like to have this document be moved into evidence?
I'm not opposed to that. Although none of the witnesses have really identified it, that they reviewed it, and I believe their testimony is that they reviewed the 2005, but I don't have a problem with admitting into evidence to the extent it's in any way informative.
Ms. Berger?
And no, I don't have any objection to being admitted into evidence, because I think the physical demands of the job, in both descriptions are essentially the same. So I don't think it has much change by way of that and the restrictions that Mr. Johnson has presented.
Ms. Berger, which is your last exhibit number?
I believe the last exhibit number is 25.
Could, I'm hoping we can conclude the hearing today. I think we will. But at the conclusion of the hearing, could you go ahead and label this as respondent 35, whatever the last number is, and send Ms. Creek a copy of this, and she'll get it to all of the parties involved in the hearing? Is that an acceptable way of dealing with this?
Yeah, I can label it. It would be respondent 26, so I can do that. And
yep.
Actually, I think respondent 26 is currently the last page, so I think it'll be 27. I'm just looking at it now, just for purposes of.
What do you have as your respondent 26?
It's the. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm confusing page number and respondent 25. So yes, respondent number 26, starting.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I'm looking at page 26 of the rules and regulations. I apologize. I was confused.
Yeah, so it'll be respondent 26.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay. So, at the conclusion of the hearing, if you would send copies of the new job description, or we'll just include that as part of the record for the sake of completeness. And I believe, Ms. Berger, I think you had indicated you didn't have any more questions of Ms. Hopkins. Mr. Foley, do you have any more cross-examination of Ms. Hopkins?
No, I do not.
Okay, Ms. Hopkins, I think we appreciate your testimony today. I think we're done. You're dismissed.
All right, thank you so much. Have a good day.
Mm-hmm. Ms. Berger, any further witnesses?
I have no further witnesses.
Okay, are we prepared to move into closing arguments? Mr. Foley, Ms. Berger?
I have a question. This is sort of a procedural question. Would you like us to submit a memorandum at the conclusion of this with the findings of fact and conclusions of law?
Yes.
Okay, but you still also want us to provide a closing statement here today, and then do we have sort of the opportunity to refine the closing statement in our
I'm willing to just go with the proposed findings of fact and conclusions of law, assuming Mr. Foley would be agreeable to that also.
Yeah, or would that, as long as I can put the gist of my closing in the opinions, the conclusions of fact of law.
I don't think we're going to have any objection with that. Okay. So, all right. So, under the code, the Civil Service Board is supposed to render a decision within 45 days of the hearing. So we kind of have a little bit of a tight turnaround time here because of the holiday. My thought is to stick to sort of the our initial timetable that we discussed at our scheduling conference, and the idea would be to have your findings of fact and conclusions of law filed, submitted to Ms. Demetria Creek by January the 4th. Is that acceptable?
That's
That'll be
fine by
that's 3 weeks from today.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the board will issue its decision by the 28th of January. So that'll just get us in under the 45-day statutory period.
Okay.
All right.
Is there a
Go ahead.
procedure? I don't know if it's through you as the board or through Ms. Creek, where if we want to request the transcripts through the court reporter.
That's a very good question. Mr. Corbin, can you answer that question for us? In terms of getting the transcript, or maybe Ms. Creek is in a position to answer that question. I don't know what the typical procedure for obtaining the transcript is. Ms. Creek, do you know?
Sorry, but no, this is fairly new to me. I'll have to see guidance on that to find out exactly what we have done in the past.
Okay. I know we have the court reporters on the call. I don't know if you could answer, has any information for us that might be able to assist us.
I'll have it done as soon as I speak with either Miss Creek or Hillary.
Okay.
But usually within 10 days.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I guess I'll touch base with Ms. Creek and or Hillary to figure out how we can get a copy of the transcript and make sure all those boxes are checked.
Also, Hillary, is there any chance that we would have access to the recording of this Zoom hearing before then?
The recording will be on YouTube immediately after the meeting.
Okay, so there's that option also. Okay, all right, so just to confirm, proposed findings of fact and conclusions of law will be submitted on January the 4th, and the board will render its decision in writing by the 28th. If there is nothing further, we can go ahead and conclude our hearing today and adjourn for the day. Anything else?
Thank you. Nope.
All right, thank you everyone for your patience, especially with all the technology issues we've had today. Again, thank you very much. And we'll proceed as we discussed. All right, so this will conclude the hearing and adjourn our meeting for the day.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.